From the outside looking in, it can sometimes appear that peak performers have an elusive talent or skill that sets them apart from the rest of us. However, what usually sets peak performers apart isn't what they can do, it's what they will do. You are listening to the Trading Edges Podcast, the podcast dedicated to seeking and sharing the best ideas and principles from peak performers across all domains of performance and achievement to help you discover your full trading potential.
Greetings, ladies and gentlemen. This is Houston, and welcome to another episode of Trading Edges. And I want to first begin by thanking you all for your continued support. And as always, I'd love to hear your continued feedback. So do you have any questions you'd like to hear answered on air? Or if you have any topics you'd like us to cover, head on over to the blog site where you can now record a message or just send me an email. You can send me your questions at houston@thetradingedge.org. Also, this podcast is all about inspiring and empowering traders. So if you enjoy these podcasts, please leave us a positive review on iTunes so that others can find the show. Now let's get into this week's topic. And this week's episode is a mini episode that I'm calling Finding the Currency of Performance. So we've all heard the saying that time is our most precious resource, even more so than money, right? And although time is sacred, I'm really of the opinion that our most valuable resource is energy and not time. In fact, I believe that energy is so sacred that I would value it as the highest form of currency. You see, in our modern era, we constantly borrow from Peter to pay Paul, and it's a poor trade. We deplete ourselves of our physical energy by burning the candle, right, at both ends, by neglecting to properly feed, care, and respect for our bodies. And usually, this persists for week after week, year after year, until we squander our biological inheritance. And then we have to rely on modern medicine just to cover the symptoms, right? We're just surviving. We're never even thriving. Then we spend all of our time on social media, yet somehow we feel disconnected from our friends, our families, and from ourselves. And we live in this time of immense prosperity and richness. There are tons and tons of opportunities, and yet society suffers from the highest known levels of depression and mental illness. We have this always on culture where we're drowning in headline news, and yet most of us are thirsty for true wisdom. You know, you see everyone spouting news headlines, yet no one can actually go deep and actually spout some true knowledge or true wisdom. We live these lives of constant distraction, jumping from task to task, headline to headline, and just lacking true depth and the ability to be focused and creative. In the end, what we see is we live lives of quiet desperation, right? Like Thoreau said, disconnected from our values and lacking of purpose. And many of us, unfortunately, realize only much later in life that this was a Faustian bargain that we made with ourselves. And we ask ourselves in our dying beds, was it supposed to be this way? In episode 5 of this podcast, hedge fund manager Bruce Bauer, which I interviewed, shared with us a great quote, and it had me really think a lot of how I was showing up in the world. And the quote goes, "The true peak performers amongst us are the ones who best manage their energies." And that comes from a great book which I'll talk about in a few moments. So by now, I think most of you understand or probably realize that what's robbing us of our ability to truly perform or to truly achieve or to truly to show up in life, what's really missing or what's really at the root of the issue is multifaceted and multilayered. And the key is to become conscious and aware of what engages us, that is what brings us alive, and what drains us energetically. See, all of us, unfortunately, we sometimes run on autopilot and we get disconnected from these things about what really turns us alive and what really shuts us down. Now, most of us understand this perspective of managing this kind of energy when applied to managing physical energy, right? So how we feel energetically when we talk about energy, most of us feel, that we're talking about how much, do I have in my gas tank? But most of us also undervalue and perhaps underappreciate the power of harnessing the other dimensions of energy. In Tony Schwartz's classic, and this is a great book, it's called The Power of Full Engagement. I have that as number 4 in my top recommended books list. Schwartz lays out the case that energy has 4 quadrants. I'll list them out right now. Physical, emotional, mind, and spiritual. And this stuff is not woo-woo, and I'll get into some of the details now, and then what we can do about it in a few moments. So first, physical energy. Physical energy, as most of us know, is that spark, right? That will allow us to carry out our lives and seize the moment. Without that spark, we can't get out of bed. Number 2, emotional energy. Emotional energy influences our self-confidence, right? Our self-discipline, our relationships, and just how empathic we are with other human beings. Thirdly, our mind, our mental energy. And that energy gives us the ability to have focus, drive, creativity, and to actually apply our intelligence. And lastly, spiritual energy. Spiritual energy isn't about some sort of woo-woo stuff out there. It simply comes from having a sense of purpose, some developed values, helping others, and having integrity. Because having strong integrity means doing things according to your values, even when you have to face some of the hardest challenges you've ever faced. Right? That's going to be the resilience that comes from spirit. So here are some of the ideas that Schwartz lays out around sort of the keys to managing your energy. And here's what I've been playing with for the past little while that I want to share with you. The first thing, you want to draw energy from each dimension. Each dimension is necessary, but being overweighted in one is not enough. So you cannot be good at just one of those dimensions. They all have to be balanced. Because if you're overdeveloped, let's say, in physical energy, but you have poor development around your emotions, your mental and spiritual strength, you won't get very far. Likewise, if I'm strong emotionally, mentally, and spiritually, but I can't get out of the bed in the morning because I've compromised my physical body through too much abuse, too many late nights, too much caffeine, too much drugs, then how can I show up in the world? So, tip number 2, and Schwartz uses this great word, which I love, is to undulate and balance stress and rest. Undulate, right? So have that cyclical approach to stress and rest. Think of yourself like a sprinter, right? You want to push yourself, but then create space for relaxation. Because some acute stress is good. We don't want to live lives of no stress, without stress. However, chronic stress or these low levels of stress just impairs performance. So we don't want to remove all of our stress from our lives, right? Because there's this idea of eustress versus distress, where a little bit of stress is a very productive and developmentally productive stimulus. Because think of the other way. Think about your life personally for a second. Think about the most stressful moments you had in your life. Now, what would happen if you removed all those moments from your life? I bet I can say that there wouldn't be a lot left. Because interestingly enough, the most stressful parts of our lives also happen to be the most meaningful part of our lives. So if we live lives devoid of stress, we ultimately live lives devoid of meaning. So, to maintain a powerful drive in our lives, we have to learn how to undulate between energy expenditure and renewal, all right? Whether that comes from, again, the physical side, the emotional side, the mental side, and the spiritual side. Thirdly, we need to practice going beyond our limits and living outside our comfort zones. There's a well-known acronym in the world of strength training, and that's the term SAID, S-A-I-D, which stands for Specific Adaptation to Imposed Demand. And applying this concept means that we must cultivate the practice of developing all the elements of physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual strength. Right? We're only as strong as how hard we push it. Okay? I often say, if we train ourselves and conditions ourselves to be, let's say, distracted by constantly, checking our mobile devices, checking our tablets, checking every single email that pops up in our mailbox, we're training ourselves to be distracted. So if you expect yourself to be focused and have the ability to actually turn on your ability to be attentive, then how can you expect yourself to do that when you spend most of your day living in a zone of distraction? So we want to be specific and demand ourselves to go beyond our physical comforts and not try to live lives of comfort and ease. And lastly, the fourth key, to use energy rituals to renew our energy. The peak performers in all domains create space to renew energy across those 4 quadrants, those 4 areas. Right? So what can you build into your practices, into your habits that give you time, space to begin to renew yourself? Does that mean, physically turning off the monitors and stepping away from the computers and giving yourself time to nap or to meditate or to journal or to connect with other people or to study, right? And to stop doing what is just easy and low level stress. So, in summary, the principles I've outlined here form the foundations from which I try to live from. Now, am I always able to follow all these practices and principles? Of course not. Right? I'm human, and I fail, make mistakes, like everyone else. I stay up too late. I work too hard. I get too self-involved at times. I even neglect the ones I love. But hear me out. A lot of this is awareness. And the thing to remember is that it's about our orientation. It's about direction, not perfection, right? And I believe that these core principles are the foundation for anyone who wants to go from good to great, from great to world class. Anyways, I wanted to give you that summary, that sort of nugget in terms of peak performance today. That's a wrap for today's podcast. Again, thanks for tuning in. If you have any questions for this episode, once again, head on over to the blog. We can record a message or just send me an email at houston@thetradingedge.org. Happy trading.
You've been listening to the Trading Edges podcast. We've taken this interview and summarized all the big ideas so that you can take action. Just head over to thetradingedge.org/podcast to find the show notes, transcript, resources, and to continue the conversation.